You can think of all those people in India or across the world who do not access, who have no access at all. And so you can imagine what's going to happen with medical services becoming suddenly unavailable to a very large amount of people in the world, a very large proportion of people in the world. And so that's going to be an interesting way in which we have to think about how to bring digital technology to all these people such that they can access medical services at a higher level of satisfaction. And so this is a significant worry because health is moving very quickly towards a digital future. It has to, because this is just the technology that everyone wants to adopt. And by everyone, I don't mean that 100% of the population of the world want to adopt it, but what I mean is that people who are in power, who are technocrats, they are looking at a future which is more and more digital. It's not necessary that health has to be digitized in some sense, but people are looking at this situation and they are thinking that we have to digitize this because this is the only way we have to go forward. It's not like the health systems did not work properly before or something like that. It's just that they would work more efficiently. This is what is thought to be the case. We don't have much evidence that health systems work more efficiently if they are digitized. But one would imagine that things would be faster. However, this will leave out all those people who do not have access and who do not know how to use those services. So remember, when we had CoWIN as an app, and we still have it, and people are still using it. When we have access to it, then it's perfectly all right. If you have an Aadhaar card or a phone number, you are able to do something with it, and you get a date, and you can get a vaccine. But what about those people who don't have an ID? And so that's going to be a big problem, because if you can only access a vaccine through a particular ID and through CoWIN, then you need both a computer or a smartphone, and you need an ID. So if you don't have an ID, you're not going to get vaccinated, and if you don't have a smartphone, well, that's going to be a very complex situation in any case. So even if you have an ID and you don't have a smartphone, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. Indeed, in a great deal of trouble, especially if there is no digital way of accessing, or there is no way of even accessing a computer or a smartphone. And so while CoWIN helps all those people who have access, it also acts as a hindrance to those people who don't have access. And so even in cities where people live in slums, they have had problems getting vaccinated, and we all know this from newspaper reports. So another thing that happens in the health sector is that AI machines are going to be much better, and we already know that they are much better in diagnosing patients. And so there's going to be a little bit of replacement of doctors by AI machines, because AI machines are very good at diagnosis. So that's going to be something that's going to happen, maybe not at a particularly quick rate in India, but definitely something like this is going to happen in developed countries, where at least for very simple ordinary purposes, instead of meeting a doctor, you will simply be telling an AI machine what's your problem, and the AI machine will give a very reasonable, solid diagnosis with which you can be confident that you will get well. And so that's an interesting development that's going to take place in the health sector that affects doctors in a very personal way. Of course, these AI machines are not going to be of any use to someone who has no access to them and has no idea how to use them. So again, as we increase the digital technology across medical services, is going to put pressure, increasing pressure, on those people who are left out of the system completely. As I already said, even at a very moderate level, 40% of the population of the world does not have access. I'm not even speaking of usage here, I'm just speaking of access. They don't have access to digital technology of any kind. And so therefore you can imagine what's going to happen to these people when health gets digitized, health services get digitized. And so it's going to be a very interesting and complex situation as to how to bring up these people to ensure that they can participate and get the benefit of all the health services that are available. So you can see that while the digital divide needs to be, well, the gap has to be put together in such a way such that it doesn't affect people in a very, very serious manner, But we also have a very significant challenge in that we need very, very serious digital literacy to ensure that people are able to participate in the economy and in health. But I'm sure as academics, most of you are most deeply interested in education as to what's going to happen there. Well, we already know, and indeed this is itself is a platform where we are using online technology to get across certain information. And there is an increasing use of online education, so we already know about Coursera and edX, and MOOCs technologies are being used across the world. It is caught like wildfire in India as well. And so many people think that with the introduction of online education and very significant technologies that have come in, there's going to be huge pressure on colleges and universities to either change their syllabi in such a way so that it is more attractive to students, or else it might even lead to a situation where higher education institutions, not necessarily colleges, but higher education, MA, MPhil, PhD onwards, these will have to be truncated, or even there may be a case where significant reorganization might take place. Some people even think that universities might become obsolete. I think that's a little bit too much. But yes, very significant changes may be seen in the education sector in universities, because online education is available to everyone. Someone sitting in India can take a course which is being given in Harvard. You already can do that on Coursera and edX. Right now, it's not a very it's accessible to many people, but yes, I cannot still get a, let's say, an engineering degree or a full-fledged engineering degree from, let's say, Stanford or somewhere else, just sitting in some village in India. That's not going to be possible. But it may soon become possible, maybe within the next 10 years. And so therefore, this is going to put tremendous pressure on universities regarding what courses they are to run, what courses they are not to run. So in the developed world, we might face, I'm not speaking of developing countries, but let's say of the developed world, we might face a situation where universities go through a major restructuring and reorganization, and even closure, because most people would be just learning online. Why would you go 500 miles to another country to learn something when you can just learn the same thing sitting at your home? So given online education, this is going to have a significant impact on the existence of universities, how they are structured, how they are run, what kind of courses will they run, whether universities even will exist in the future is going to be a very interesting issue. What people are expecting is that universities will run in such a way that they will really be reduced to research units of some kind. So this might happen in very small countries like Finland or Norway, where instead of having a full-fledged university addressing all students, and all the students are coming to campus and they're taking a full education, what's going to happen is that they will take most of the education online, and when they have to do research or research projects, they will join teams of professors who are already there in the university, and those teams would basically be the departments. So somebody may be working on figuring out what supermassive black holes are doing in the universe. So you would join a team like that if you are interested in supermassive black holes, if you are interested in the poetry of the Romantic period, and you want to do some very serious research on it. There might be instead of an English literature department, you might have a particular team which is working on the Romantic poetry of a particular period. And so instead of having whole departments, you might actually have research teams in universities. That's quite possible, but I do not think that this is going to happen very quickly in the developing world. We already have significant illiteracy, and so we need to bring up our population to a particular level before we even start thinking about reorganizing universities. But the reorganization of universities is very much something that people are aware of, and they are thinking about it. How will this affect the academic profession? That's kind of hard to say, because it's very hard to automate the academic profession. Many people have said that even if many jobs disappear because of automation, teaching is one job that's going to remain. I mean, you can't really have an AI machine teach, because there is so much involved in teaching, and so there's so much face-to-face interaction involved. Teachers learn from students, students learn from teachers. It's just an interactive thing, and so it's going to be very hard to replace this with significant automation. However, with online education, it does seem as if universities are going to face very significant pressure to reorganize themselves in such a way such that the online education can be accommodated, as well as some sort of offline education is also there. So that's the impact on education. We expect significant impact on universities, the schools. There's already a lot of pressure on schools, but I guess the school system will keep continuing as there has always been some tendency of people to send students to their children to school, and you may even opt out of school if you want, and that still happens today actually. So the schooling system is bound to keep continuing, but the education, of course, within schools might change, but people are expecting that university reorganizations may happen definitely in the developed world and later on in the developing world. There's a lot of university education to be gone through in the developing world in any case. Right. So, well, there's always some good use of technology. I have been saying things which are, if you look at economy, health, education, not very good news. There's good news for the people who can access the technology, but what about people who can't access the technology? There's some good work which is done in India, as a matter of fact. So, a lot of NGOs work on this. One good example I can give you of people who are trying to bring just minimal access to very poor people who have never probably seen any kind of technology at all. So one NGO that does rather good and interesting work in Bastar is CG Netswara, that just to keep a record of a particular language spoken there called Gondi, and also of the complaints people may have, or they may have some kind of problem that they want the administration to address. They can always call in to a service, and their complaint can be recorded, and then the administration can be informed of that complaint. And so some kind of system like this has been set up by CG Netswara. It's a very small thing really, and but it has had some impact. It's not like there is no impact. So if say your tube well is not running and you are in a village, and you really, there's no way for you to contact someone in administration who's probably like 40 miles away, and that person has to come in and repair your tube well. Well, you can call up this service, and this service can then somehow get this message across to the administration, and then the administration can uh, come and do something about the tube well. So that kind of service is being run, and it's been an interesting service because it also preserves a particular language. So the Gondi language is spoken by about 14 million people in India, in what is called Gondwana land. Somewhat romantically, the name is given, and this system, which is run by the NGO CG Netswara, they are doing a good work. Basically, they are taking technology to the people and letting people record their own grievances or their own ideas in that, through that technology. So Microsoft research teams in India have helped out CG Netswara in this, and their founder, the founder of CG Netswara, actually got an award for this. So his name is Shubhranshu Chaudhary, who was a BBC journalist, and he left his work in BBC, and he's devoted his life to doing something for the tribals. And he got an award for this from the Index on Censorship, and this was a Digital Activism Award in 2014. He actually beat Edward Snowden to this. So it's a very small thing, but this shows that if you bring a little bit of digital access, but also put it to good use, you can have a very serious effect. So people are able to get a little bit of benefit, a little bit of service, because they are able to get their grievances across to administrations which may be very far off from villages. So this is a very significant problem. We don't have roads, but we are at least able to get messages across that maybe someone is unwell and needs to be in a hospital, or the tube wells out of order, and so we need to get the tube well into order so that we can get water. So these kind of simple things can actually be achieved by simple technologies. I mean, people don't even have internet there or anything like that, so they use Bluetooth to sort of share messages. How they do it is something that is a mystery even to me. And we can see that at least some good use of technology can be made, and we can use it to have a very significant impact on very poor people's lives. So it's not always about rich people with computers and laptops and all kinds of things. You can have poor people affected in a very good way by the simplest use of technology, by simply recording the messages that they are sending in. So that's a very good step that has taken place in India, and it should be adopted widely. Indeed, many other countries are thinking of adopting what Shubhranshu has done in a very serious way, for instance, in Latin America or in Africa. Right, so let's look at some of the concerns of the digital divide. Well, we have already spoken of many of the concerns in education, health, and in the economy. So there are both opportunities of the digital divide and there are concerns of the digital divide. The opportunities are very serious for those who can actually access the system and who can have good use of the system. So academics who do not access JSTOR, who do not access, let us say, Wiley or Springer, they are at a very serious disadvantage against any other academic who has access to all these things. And so you can easily tell, being an academic, that this is going to be a matter of serious concern if you don't have access to any of these services. So even if I as an academic lose access to Wiley or to Springer or JSTOR for even a day, I feel very nervous and I feel very unusual about that day, because I could not have done my research that I wanted to do, and so I have suddenly gone back in time in some sense in research. So in the same way, if you don't have access to digital technology, it is bound to have certain problems. Let us, however, look at those problems where you have access to digital technology, but it still creates problems for you. Uh, well, obviously, all of you know there is a rise of fake news. So earlier on, spreading a rumor was going to be quite hard. They would still spread, of course, but it would take time. But today, rumors can spread, completely fake news can spread very fast, from not just from one part of the city to another part of the city, from one part of the city to the entire world. And so something completely wrong, some kind of completely wrong advice, for instance, can spread across the world. So I remember when Trump said that, some particular detergent can be used and to resolve COVID. Somebody actually ate the detergent in the United States and died of it. But this is because the news is spreading so fast. So if the news did not spread fast, then maybe this false idea would not have entered this person's head, and that person would not have died. So that it's such a valuable thing, life, and so if you lose it because of fake news, that's a terrible thing, and fake news is a big problem. Well, there's also rise in cybercrime, and it turns out that there is something like, right now, the amount of money which is meant, which goes into fighting cybercrime is 1% of the GDP of the world. It's about $600 billion. This figure was in 2018, by the way. So I'm citing a figure from 2018. We don't have the figures for 2021 right now, but we have figures from 2018, and these figures come from McAfee. And so they are saying that about $600 billion are spent every year in 2018 on fighting cybercrime. Cybercrime is on the rise in an exponential manner. And so this is going to be a very significant problem for anyone who uses technology. I am not even speaking of those who don't have access to it. It's a blessing if you don't have access to technology in some sense, because at least then you don't have to be constantly being reminded of the fact that you need to protect your phone, you need to put a password in it, or you need to protect your bank account with 1,000 different passwords. Even changing the smallest thing in a bank account today needs something like 5 OTPs, and so you know how complex that matter is, and what a waste of time it is as well. Earlier life was much simpler, but today with digital technologies, for some reason life has, instead of getting simpler, it has got much tougher. Why? Because of cybercrime. Cybercrime is on the rise, and they are getting smarter and smarter and smarter, and we just have to keep on improving our technology to get better than the people who are trying to actually take away something from you using that technology. Then we have the repeated proving of identity. This is also a major problem. So when you use digital technology, you have to constantly put in IDs and numbers of all kinds. So a human being is essentially just reduced to a kind of identity of some kind of a numerical identity. And so you have some Aadhaar card or many other cards, as a matter of fact. And so you need to connect all these cards with each other. And so you are essentially just reduced to a connection between various different identity cards that you have. And so if you don't have these cards, well, that's a serious problem for you. Even though it should not be. I mean, you are a perfectly sensible citizen, you're not going to create any problems for anyone, you're just studying in a corner somewhere. But if you don't have these identities, you're going to be in serious trouble. So this is one of the bigger problems of the digital access. That is that the moment you have access, you also need an identity. And that identity kind of puts you in a particular corner. And there is a kind of rising demand for more and more identity indicators. So you need an identity indicator in one place, another place you need another identity indicator. It just goes on and on forever. So this is also a singular problem that governments will have to look at. As to we do not want to have so many different identities, and especially in terms of various cards and numbers and whatever. But there is a significant rise for a need of this. Then we have loss of jobs that we have already spoken of. With increasing automation, you're bound to have loss of jobs, and so that's going to lead to basic minimum income. But that's just something that's going to happen with digital access. The more digital access you have, interestingly, that's going to lead to lesser jobs, because the digital access itself provides automation which can do all the jobs that you can actually do. So, for instance, the Chinese have developed an AI machine which can actually tell them what's the best thing to do in foreign policy. So, foreign policy is a very complex operation, as all of you know, and it's quite hard to think what to do tomorrow, what to do in 1 week, what to do in 1 year regarding our foreign policy towards another country. If you feed all the information into a system which has some AI programming, it can do a much better job of foreign policy. So you may not need a very significant amount of workforce in foreign ministries. All you need is an AI machine really, and the Chinese have actually done some work on this to appear to think that such an AI machine would actually do a much better job. So it's not just loss of jobs for people who are just getting in factories. It's also loss of jobs for people who maybe who want to do some higher kind of work. So then there's of course rise in inequality. That's going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. The digital divide is an aspect of inequality, and it's a very significant aspect of inequality. That inequality is just going to widen, because the moment you have access to digital, you have digital access, you have access to all kinds of banking services, you have access to share markets, you have access to cryptocurrency, and so your wealth can rise, whereas those who do not have access, well, they are just going to be where they are, and so their indicators of economic progress are going to go much worse. They will go south, so to speak. And so that's going to be a significant problem that we are bound to face. That's why people are so deeply worried about the digital divide. It is indeed a worrying thing. Even if you have access, that's going to be worrying. But even if you do not have access, that's going to be even more worrying for the economy. So there is also deteriorating social interaction. So lots of people have found out that those who are interacting on Facebook are not really friends of each other. Friendship needs a bit more social interaction, but the only thing if you do is just, you just go on online and you have some kind of profile and you are changing it and you're talking to people. You're not really friends with anyone. Yes, you know them and you may be very intimate with them, but you're still not friends with them. Friendship needs something else. And so there is a lesser and lesser friendship in society. Greater and greater social alienation is going on. There is a greater and greater atomization. We already had atomization with industrialization. That's already there in society. So the digital access is actually leading to greater atomization. Then there is no value of knowledge. That's also a very significant problem. So now, because I can just type something in Google and find out where the Eiffel Tower is, or what's the height of the Eiffel Tower, I don't really care about somebody who knows this stuff. I can just click a button, type something in Google and find out. So you really don't have to remember anything anymore. So most school students are not very interested in remembering things anymore. So they think the stuff is just available at the click of a button. And so why should I really take my time, use my time to remember this stuff? So there was a time when people remembered whole poems, and indeed vast quantities of poems were remembered by people. But today nobody even remembers a single line of a poem. Why? Because you don't have to. You just type a particular word and you can write down the name of the poem on the in Google and you will just get the whole poem. So you don't really have to remember anything. And so this is a rather interesting problem, because it devalues knowledge, and it devalues knowledge holders. That's also a very critical issue in education, because when knowledge is devalued, then people will not have much interest in schools and universities and colleges, because these are the repositories of knowledge. A university is essentially a repository of knowledge. And so when knowledge is devalued to the extent that it is today, because of access to the internet and access to social media, we face as teachers a rather serious situation, in that all that we know is already available on certain media. and that's available at a very low cost. And so therefore it creates a rather odd impression that even if I know nothing about anything, I can just click a button and find out. And so this leads to a rather odd problem regarding the less value for knowledge. And so then of course there's the whole issue of manipulation of elections. This has already happened. We already know what Facebook did with Cambridge Analytica, so I don't have to inform you about it. uh, there is no doubt that social media can be used in a very effective way by unscrupulous politicians to manipulate elections. It happens across the world. No nation is away from it. All nations are in danger of having their elections manipulated in a very, very big way by social media and by use of propaganda. Propaganda has always been used, that's always been around, right, since the early 20th century. And so it's just going to get worse and worse with greater and greater digital access. So everyone knows that you have digital access, and if you have digital access, well, you are going to be subject to all kinds of propaganda, all kinds of fake news, all kinds of advertising, and that's going to affect you in making your decisions about who are your next leaders. And so that's a very significant misuse of digital media. So we need to be aware of two things about digital media. One is the use of it. That straightforwardly falls into the digital divide. But there's also the misuse of it. That also is a very significant problem, because a person who does not have access to any digital information may actually be less prejudiced when it comes to an election, but the person who has access to the digital information and indeed is much more influential in making decisions and getting them across to other people will be more prejudiced in an election, because they have more access to fake news and more access to propaganda and more access to advertising. So the digital divide can be a blessing sometimes, because if you don't use Facebook, you're not really losing anything. But if you don't use it, then you are kind of away from the world, so to speak. Everybody seems to be using it, so you might think that you are missing out on something, but you are not really missing much. But if you are not using very significant academic services like JSTOR or Springer or Wiley, access to these things, then you are in serious trouble, at least so far as academic progress is concerned. And so the digital divide kind of plays out in very different ways. It can play out in a very negative way for the economy, for health, for education. It can also play out in a very positive way in all of these three situations. Increasingly, it seems to play out in a very negative way, especially when it comes to issues like Snapchat or Instagram. There has been just 2 or 3 days back, around September 30, October 1, October 2, there was a congressional hearing about Instagram in the United States, where it has been pointed out that Instagram is having a very serious effect on teenage girls. And so Instagram's chief was called, and questions were asked regarding their reaction to the studies that have been conducted. And right now this whole issue is in its infancy, but it's very obvious that there is a fair amount of access of digital information which is a very, very it's in a situation where you do not really want that digital access so much. So we want the digital access to the services that a computer or a smartphone can provide, but it can also provide many things which we don't really need. We don't need fake news. We don't need to be misled or be the subject of all kinds of advertisement. But that's what is increasingly happening so far as the digital divide is concerned. Or so more digital access can lead to serious problems, and the digital divide is going to play out in a manner which has to be watched by all of us. So we already have various social inequalities in the world. The digital divide is an aspect of social inequality. It's going to play out in a very, very significant way in the coming days. It already is playing out in a very significant way. Two other countries, two major areas of the world which are affected are Africa and Asia, and of course we are sitting in India, and so we are mostly deeply worried about India. And India has caught on to technology in a big way, and we have to see how the digital divide is going to play out here and in what manner it's going to play out. We have to be aware of the predictions of the future regarding blockchain technologies, cryptocurrency. We have to be aware about these things because we don't want to be hit by them without having any knowledge of them. So it's very important to be aware of the digital divide, and also of the awareness regarding digital access as to what it actually does to us. So it is not just that we do something with digital access, it also does something to us. In any case, I will finish with this. I have given you a little bit of information about certain statistics about the digital divide, about certain effects and consequences that it is going to have in education, health, and economics. And I have tried to talk about certain concerns regarding the digital divide. I will leave you with these consequences and concerns, and I hope that this talk was useful for you. Thank you very much.